any of us could go to jail. That's the reality on the sovereign citizen movement. And it's hard to think of any other ideology where 4 police have been killed and at least several injured as a result of a set of common beliefs. I can't think of another example in Australian recent history where that's occurred. We really are dealing with a dangerous edge. There weren't many child pornography offenders who left my court without getting really long jail sentences because of my abhorrence for the crime. The reaction for me of having to deal with that nest of cases was really horrific. I couldn't get the images out of my head.
Magistrates, by the nature of their work, are often criticised by the public for going soft on crime. And then you have, on the other hand, criminals they convict and sentence think they've been hard done by. It's a tough job being a local court magistrate, but they do play a crucial role in society. Today, we were fortunate to have retired magistrate David Heilpern join us on the podcast, where he gave us a fascinating insight into the life of a magistrate, including everything from the time he held a sick bag for a prisoner, faced death threats, and his dealings with sovereign citizens, and why he became known as the fuck magistrate. That's going to be interesting. If you had a preconceived idea about the person who sits in judgment of others, have a listen to what David has to say about the role. I think you'll be surprised and perhaps shocked about the person he is and his views on crime and punishment. It was a refreshing chat, and one that opened my eyes up to the complexity of the role. David Heilpern, welcome to I Catch Killers.
Thanks so much.
Well, look, old habits die hard, so if I start referring to you as Your Honour, you know that I've got flashbacks to times in the witness box where I've been dissected by very clever legal people. So if I fall into that trap, forgive me.
Well, when you and I started in court, I think it was Your Worship.
Yeah, that changed 2004, I think, or around that time, was it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right. You stopped worshipping me and started honouring me, so there you go.
Either way, I was trying to give you respect, Your Honour, Your Worship, sir. You were 21 years as a magistrate. Did you become accustomed to people addressing you in that manner, Your Honour, Your Worship, that type of thing?
Never. It always felt completely bizarre, really. I kept looking around, wondering who they were talking to. It's such an artificial environment, really. The court, where you refer to people not by their name, but solely by their title, and of course Your Worship and Your Honour, they're meant to instantly give authority. But I sort of always felt that authority should be earned and respect should be earned rather than just given by a title.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it. In my research that I did in preparation for it, I saw it was either in an article or an interview you did. You had some funny situations with the way that you were being addressed, and where someone in court obviously trying to do their best, but referred to you as Your Majesty.
Your Majesty, Your Most Worshipfulness. Yeah, you really got the full gamut. Your Majesty was delivered by a fellow who'd only just immigrated from India, and he was bending over backwards to show respect. So I just let it go.
Yeah, it would have been a little bit embarrassing if you pull him up on that.
Absolutely. I also got called Your Holiness once as well, when I thought being elevated to the Pope was really something else.
Well, I'm glad you didn't buy into your own fame and the own adulation that you had from people in your courts. But it's interesting the way you see people come into courts, because it is a strange environment for people, isn't it?
It really is. And, you know, I always, you and I discussed this in preparation, that by the time you've been a police officer for 5 or 10 years, going to court just becomes natural and you're pretty relaxed about it.
Yeah.
Whereas for people who've never been there before, particularly young people, Aboriginal people, people from different backgrounds, it's quite a scary environment for them. And I think one of the real functions of good lawyers, good prosecutors and good judicial officers is to make people feel relaxed and not too uptight.
Yeah, well, I think creating that relaxed atmosphere lends to a better outcome as well, because I've seen people that have literally choked in the witness box. I
Yeah.
know the story or the information they wanted to provide, and it doesn't come out properly, and quite often it's because they're intimidated in a foreign type environment.
Absolutely. I used to, in training other magistrates, I used to say, courts should be like hospitals. Horrible things do happen there, but everyone's doing their best, in this case, to get to the truth and to get to a just outcome.
Yeah, no, it's important to create that. You talk about training. I've been on occasions where I've been fortunate enough to speak to law students that are going to embark on a career in law. What I try to leave my talk with, or what I try to finish off with, in giving words of wisdom in that environment, is that don't lose touch with your humanity when you're practicing law. Like I'm speaking to people, I'm talking to them from a police point of view and things that I've seen and done, but the importance of maintaining your humanity. Would you agree in that concept?
Yeah, for sure. And, I think it's part of really maintaining your sanity in these jobs. Because if you lose your humanity, then where's your touchstone when things start going wrong? I think most people join the police, most people join the legal profession because they care and they want to help other people. But if you lose your humanity, I think you can be making mistakes and errors of judgment that really impact on other people. I always tried to remind myself that I was just a human being trying to do my best in a difficult and very hothouse environment. And if you start from that perspective with a bit of humility as well as humanity, then I think justice is better served. And I'm sure we've all seen that in really good police officers too. They maintain their humanity. They realise that they're human. And we're all just doing our best in a pretty difficult system.
Yeah, I look and I agree wholeheartedly with what you've said there, but I've also seen people that lose their way because it's an adversarial system, and I see defence and prosecutors going at it like it's a game of sport, and I'm sitting in the court with the victim whose life's been turned upside down, or even the person appearing before the court. And I think sometimes that can be disarming to people involved in it, that they look and go, what's going on here? We're talking about my life, because it is high stakes in the court system.
Absolutely. And there's a difference between an adversarial system, which we have, and a competitive system, which we shouldn't have.
Yeah.
It's not actually about winning or losing. It's certainly about ensuring that your case is presented the best it can be from a prosecution or a defence point of view, and from the judicial officer's point of view, that everything is explained and that people understand what's going on. The number of times I'd sentence people and, go into language that was a bit too technical or jargon, and they wouldn't have a clue what had actually happened. That's got to be avoided. And also that over-competitiveness. I had lawyers and prosecutors almost come to blows.
Yeah, I've seen that.
At the bar table. And, you feel like saying, children, we're not actually getting to any point of having the evidence rightly presented so that I can make a decision when you're going at it like that.
Lost sight of what it's about. I'll do a segue because you mentioned language, and I think I'll bring this up. I was aware of the work that you were doing at various times in your career when you were a magistrate, and I was a police officer in homicide, so doing a lot of work around the state and different areas. But you did have a name I'll let you explain it, the fuck magistrate. Do you want to explain that?
It's true, and it's a badge I still to this day wear with some pride. Look, I think we'd all been aware of the trifecta, but I honestly hadn't seen it that much in my career as a defence lawyer and occasionally doing prosecution matters. But when I went out to Western New South Wales as a very young magistrate, I was sitting in towns like Burke in Brewarrina, Cobar, Dubbo. Every second or third case was what they call a trifecta case, where someone's arrested for offensive language and then they put up a bit of a stink and they're charged with hinder police or resist arrest and assault police, all because of language. And almost without exception, it was the word fuck. And I'd been brought up on Triple J and I'd watched movies and television, and the word had Alvin Purple, and, it had started to be used really regularly, yet people were getting arrested for it. And it's not as though they were being arrested for saying it in church.
Yeah.
They were being arrested for saying it in the street. And I had a case two cases really, one where a bike that was suspected of being stolen was being taken by a police officer, and the young Aboriginal man who it was being taken from said, "You're not fucking having it." And they said, "You're under arrest." And that was it. It was on. And the trifecta. And a second case where a woman down at the South Coast was swearing in a domestic violence situation where she was the victim and the police had attended the premises, and she had lost control really, and certainly was swearing at everybody. But in both those cases, it seemed to me to be ridiculous to arrest people, that is, deprive their liberty.
So,
and so I just heard argument from a barrister by the name of Mark Dennis, who's now an SC, and he said, "Well, I put it to you, the word's not offensive anymore. It's lost its punch, and really, this is just an unfortunate use of police powers to deal with another problem, which is disrespect, or another problem, which is not being able to control yourself in times of stress." And I accepted that argument, and I found that the word was no longer offensive, and dismissed charges against people. And there was no appeal, but there was complaint. Some police didn't like it, and 60 Minutes did a big number on it, and the police commissioner came on 60 Minutes and said, "Well, I think he's probably right. I've used that word myself."
Yeah.
And that was the end of it, really.
Like the law is set in precedents, and it goes back a long way, but it's got to be able to serve the community that it's operating for. And I think congratulations on you taking that stance on that, because I thought it was a shortcut for policing. It sort of it fitted in the early days in my policing. I think we could arrest people for being intoxicated or vagrants, and that was just the excuse. Okay, I've got no real charge. I'd take this person off the street, and that's what you were talking about. And there was times when it was abused, and you say the big three, like offensive behaviour, right, you've said the word fuck, now we're going to arrest you. When you resist, that's going to be resist police, and when you push us, that's assault police. And these people are fitting there, and I didn't like the culture of police, and probably police that I didn't respect, talking about, we'll give them the trifecta. Yeah, it was a horrible way. So congratulations on that. But I'm sure the shock jock type situation, people would have pushed back and go, "Who is this soft magistrate? He's going soft on crime. The sky's going to fall if we allow people to do to swear." So,
well, it's a funny thing because you bring your own culture, you bring your own humanity to the bench, which is something I think people don't realise. So that I think I was much tougher on domestic violence, much tougher on drink driving than many magistrates, but certainly much lighter when I thought that things have changed. And the law doesn't just stay stable, it doesn't stay in one spot. And while words like that were certainly offensive 20, 30, 40 years before I made that decision, things actually move on. And I think these days, I'd hesitate to say it now, but the N word when you refer to people who are coloured, I think that word is far more offensive than the word fuck is today.
Well, you'd get more reaction from someone if you said that. If you're throwing out the F word, no one's going to bat an eyelid. If you said the other word, people would. And I agree. And when you're looking at it, the definition of the actual crime is that you've offended people. I took offence to the fact, and I say this jokingly, I thought it was quite funny that there was an article written about it and your stance, and they referenced, was it Chuck Fowler, the infamous corrupt detective in the Royal Commission?
That's right.
Where we all,
every second word that came out of his mouth.
we all sat at home watching his tapes in his car or whatever, and he was using the word as a punctuation mark, and
totally. Well, I thought it was funny that someone said to me that his shorts were more offensive than his language.
Oh no, you're bringing back those images. We should move on from that. Yeah, I do recall where they had the camera. It wasn't a good position.
No.
Tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up, and how did you find your way into law?
My dad was a lawyer, and my uncle Hal was a lawyer and then a Supreme Court judge, Hal Sperling. And there was a lot of law talk around our kitchen table. My dad was very involved in civil liberties and in prisoner action group, and he was chief of staff to Frank Walker, the then Attorney General, when I was a child.
Right.
So I got brought up in a hothouse environment of law. I, of course, rejected that completely and wanted to be a vet because we grew up on a farm in Bathurst, and I thought that's it. But I missed out on the marks to be a vet just by a couple of marks.
Yeah.
And in those days, whatever mark you got, that was it.
It stuck.
And vet science was much higher. So law was my second choice, but I never regretted it, really. As soon as I started at law school, I had some absolutely inspirational fellow students and inspirational teachers, and I loved it. I love it to this day. I find it's interesting and exciting and intellectually challenging and morally challenging, the kinds of dilemmas that the law brings up. So my background was being brought up in that environment, but I went to Bathurst High School, so I wasn't from a private school. And
Okay.
I did my law degree. I moved to Sydney to do law, and I hated living in the city, so I moved back to Bathurst and did it externally.
Yeah.
And when I finished, by then I had a couple of kids, so it wasn't a question of to finish off, as most people would be aware, you've got to do another course, which is called the College of Law or the Legal Workshop. And to do that, I got offered a scholarship to do that in Canberra with ANU and the Australian Attorney General's Department. So I joined them and then didn't like living in Canberra either. Realised I was definitely a country boy and got a job with a law firm in Kyogle.
Right.
And opened a branch office in Nimbin because I loved Nimbin. I thought it was the centre of the universe. Okay,
I've spent a bit of time at Nimbin myself. Were you the radical, going to change the world type uni student and taking on the world? Was that your thing?
Yes, I think you could say that. I was involved in protests. I don't know if you remember the case, but there was a case called Violet Roberts where she'd killed her husband Bruce, and she'd got life imprisonment. And I think my first set of demonstrations were to do with releasing her from custody when really she was just trying to defend herself against domestic violence. It led to the change in law for provocation as a defence.
Okay.
So that was, at that time the Tassie Dams marches were happening. And so, I thought it was a great chance to enjoy myself, meet interesting people, particularly of the opposite sex, and get involved in politics.
Okay, so I'm getting a picture of the type of person you were, and recreational drugs in that environment. I think statute of limitations are past that, and I haven't cautioned you, so I think we can speak openly about that.
Indeed, and I've been open about that. I should say that in those days it was very unusual for people to use any drugs other than just cannabis.
Yeah.
And I certainly inhaled and exhaled, fortunately.
Not to President Clinton.
And I really enjoyed it. I thought cannabis was a terrific drug. For me, I didn't like drinking.
Yep.
I found it, I didn't like being around people who were drinking that much either. It was pretty aggro.
Yeah.
Whereas smoking was very mellow, and it helped me, weirdly, focus on my studies enormously. I mean, I did well with my studies, and I know that it's unpopular to say, but for some people it really helped slow me down.
I think it's interesting with the drug situation, like when we're talking cannabis and that. I know people that that drug suits them. Whatever it does, it balances it out. Other people that if they touch alcohol, they're going to turn into a nightmare. Or other people can deal with alcohol. It's an individual thing. The effect that it has on you. Living that type of lifestyle, do you think that served you well when you did eventually start practicing law?
Yes, I think it did. I mean, I joined a small firm and I was doing criminal defence work.
Yep.
doing legal aid, doing Aboriginal legal service work, and of course moving to the far north coast and having a branch office in Nimbin. A significant proportion of my work was drug work, and no one was really specialising in that much. But I enjoyed that kind of work. I enjoyed the clients. I enjoyed the repartee with some of the elements of the drug squad. We loved to hate each other and teased each other on the wins and losses that we had, probably far too competitive. But I enjoyed the work environment, and I enjoyed that doing drug work. And as you can imagine, there was plenty of it. There was a lot of people being arrested for cannabis plants. It was at the days of the helicopter raids where crops were routinely being seized and burnt and people arrested. There was a lot of people charged just with simple possessions, and it sort of motivated me to speak up and speak out about why the law needed to be changed. And I guess I felt completely hypocritical as well, because I was a person who, not daily, in fact not even weekly, but if I went out, I really liked and enjoyed to have a smoke.
Yeah, I can understand the conflict there, but that was the environment. Like Nimbin, I spent some time up there, not working, but also time up there when I was working, and it was quite funny driving up there. Even an unmarked police car, you'd pull up to a commune, and the whole commune would disappear into the bushes, calling out government car, and just disappearing. And I just a side note, I had a conversation with a family up there, and they were most distraught that they raised their children in very much the Nimbin lifestyle, and their children had rebelled, and they were disappointed that they're trying to get careers and they're getting jobs and different things like that. And
it's an absolute tragedy when that happens. Of course,
they raise them with all the right values.
When you call someone Possum Rainbow and they still become an accountant, you've definitely failed.
Defence, did you ever consider prosecution? Did you ever go down that path?
I did do some prosecuting. I did one of our clients, or several of our clients, were local councils, and I did some prosecution work there. And there is no doubt that the best training to be a defence lawyer is to do some prosecution. Makes sense. And vice versa. A mate of mine who's now the Minister for Local Government, Ron Honig, was a public defender for many years, and then he did a stint in the Crown prosecutions, and he said to me, I learnt more in that 6 months about being a good defence lawyer, in fact just being a good lawyer, by swapping the side of the fence. And I think doing the prosecution work for local councils, for people who had built dangerous structures or had committed other environmental type offences, that was really powerful training ground, and also showed me that things weren't quite as black and white as I'd thought they were. It also showed me that a good prosecutor and a good defence lawyer together can really get to the truth of a situation, normally get an agreed set of facts, normally get an agreed plea, and there's no need for all the difficulties. Well, I did find really quickly that I did not like defending sexual assault cases. I found them gruelling, and I never felt comfortable in the role of cross-examining victims of sexual assault. Yeah,
I would imagine that's. I know a lot of people in the legal sector, and that's pretty much across the board. It's hard. There's certain offences, and sometimes it crosses that line, and it must be hard doing that. Jumping between the two sides, and as you said, coming to a situation where if both parties are amenable, having an agreed set of facts, and resolving the situation fairly. That's the ultimate game, or the ultimate goal, isn't it? That you want to achieve in that environment.
Absolutely, because it means that everyone knows where they're at. And it also means, particularly in violent crimes, that people don't have to give evidence. And I think we would all agree that the process as a victim of crime of giving evidence can often be, it's often described as being worse than the experience itself, and I think having to relive it and all the difficulties associated with that. And the other thing is there's a good rule in law, which is if you plead guilty, you get a discount. Yeah. And that it's not as big a discount as people realise, but it's a real carrot as opposed to a stick from a defence perspective and from a prosecutorial perspective.
Yeah, I see the benefits of that, and I never got bogged down. I know people have really strong views on sentencing and all that, and I personally don't like, and the whole range of offences where they talk about mandatory sentencing on offences. One thing I've learnt watching people go through the courts is that each case is unique in its own way. And to put a blanket, a mandatory sentence for if you're convicted of this offence doesn't always fit the right crime or fit the crime.
I totally agree. I think there's a problem with our sentencing system, and that is that the prosecution don't appeal enough. It's very hard to get the DPP to appeal a sentence, particularly from the local court. And what that means is that the whole appeal system is skewed, so only defence lawyers appeal, and then magistrates are sitting there getting their sentences lessened more often than not.
Yeah.
And in the whole time I was a magistrate, I never had one sentence increased. In fact, I never had a New South Wales DPP appeal against a sentence. Now, that's just wrong.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure I was too lenient on occasions. I mean, you try not to be, and you try and err on the side of right. But the system is skewed, and it shouldn't be. And we wouldn't need mandatory sentencing if we had a decent and proper appeal system.
Yeah, it's interesting. The appeal system, out of all the aspects of court, I found the appeal system, I could sit in court being involved in appeals, and it just seemed so complex, the appeal system. It's, quite often I'd sit there and I think I've got reasonable intelligence in trying to understand the process of courts, but I got to say, sometimes I've sat in court, especially appeals at the High Court and that, and I'm sitting there going, what are we talking about here? It's very complex.
Totally, and then one of the great things about being magistrates is you never had to deal with anybody else's appeals because you were right at the bottom of the barrel.
Okay.
You were the court of first instance, and it was just you were the first one to have a go, and if people had a different view, well, that was fine by me. I never got upset by appeals, and you're right, I often didn't understand them either.
Yeah, just on this nuanced point of law that it would just go over my head sometimes. How long were you practicing law before you became a magistrate? How long were you doing that for?
I was practicing for about 10 years before I became a magistrate, but during that time also I got invited, along with another local lawyer, to help establish Southern Cross University Law School.
Right.
And so I was a part-time lawyer for the last 4 or 5 years as we set up that law school, and I became an academic at it. It was really apparent to local practitioners. In those days, if you wanted to practice in New South Wales, you had to do your degree in New South Wales and you had to get admitted in New South Wales. So all the lawyers on the far north coast would have to, anyone who wanted to be a lawyer from a rural or regional area in New South Wales had to go to Sydney. Yeah. And that was just it was really difficult for many people. It was a barrier. So we thought, well, let's start the first non-metropolitan law school in Australia, which we did. Yeah.
That you spent 4 years. Was it 98 that was it research that you did in prisons and
yes.
wrote a book about? Can we talk about that before we talk about your role as the magistrate? That was before you became a magistrate?
It was. I was representing a young man who had, from the Gold Coast, who'd come down to Tuntable Falls community and conducted a raid. Now, that sounds like a police action, but in fact, hippies were pretty vulnerable to people coming in with guns and stealing their crops. Yep. And he had been involved in that. He was 19 and going on 15. And when his bail was refused, I said it was in the district court, I said, this young man is likely to get sexually assaulted in prison, and that's why you should give him bail. And the judge said to me, well, where's the proof of that? Where's the proof that anyone that happens? And the Corrective Services Minister had said, well, rape is inevitable in prison. And I quoted that. The judge wasn't too impressed with that. And I thought, give me a chance. I'll go and I'll find out. There must be research on it. And I found out that within Australia there was none. Absolutely no research. So that case, that young man was bail refused, and after he was sexually assaulted in prison and he killed himself. Yeah. That really motivated me to start researching this issue. And so I got some funding, and I suppose also I was motivated by the fact that I was an academic who didn't have a higher degree, and that was a bit of a no-no. So I decided to do a higher degree in research, interviewing 300 prisoners aged 18 to 25 as to whether they'd been assaulted or sexually assaulted while they were in prison. And unsurprisingly, about 1 in 3 had been sexually assaulted while they were in prison. Sometimes that took the form of what we would call rape, but often it was a protective pairing. In other words, they would pair with someone who was bigger, tougher and would protect them in exchange for sexual favours. So that research was published and caused quite a stir. It caused a few things: the segregation of 18 to 25-year-old prisoners with each other rather than older prisoners, which was, I think, a start. The introduction of condoms into prisons, which exist to this day. And because that was HIV/AIDS was huge at that time. And also a recognition that technology has a huge and obviously an ongoing role to play in keeping prisoners safe. So I then published that research as a book and had some fun touring with that in the United States in particular, where it became, unfortunately, I donated the royalties very early on. I wish I hadn't.
Didn't think clearly enough on it.
I just thought it wouldn't sell many.
Right, but the book, Fear or Favour, Sexual Assault of Young Persons, I'm reading through parts of it, and the statistics that came out were quite frightening. And when you talk one in 3, and even as a police officer, and very much as a police officer, you had empathy on what you were doing, but you didn't really consider what happens when you send people to prison. But there have been many times when I lock people up, and I know what happens in prison and the type of people in prison, and you think, what's going to happen to them doesn't really befit the crime that they've committed. And it was almost, I looked with pity and thinking, this is terrible. I know what's going to happen to this person. They will not be able to look after themselves in prison, so they'll either have to pair up with someone for protection, or they will be attacked in the full-on sexual assault. And the impact that has on people, and as you said by your client, that resulted in him taking his own life.
And let's face it, people who go into prison and are victimised are not likely to have great self-restraint, learn the kind of skills we would hope they learn not to reoffend in that kind of environment. Of course, it would mean they wouldn't want to go back, but as we all know, criminogenic behaviour is partly willpower and partly circumstance. So you get, it's, I hope things have improved. I suspect they have. I think that there's many more avenues for complaint, a lot more protection, and the technology means that most areas of prisons are now covered by CCTV.
Well, the technology, and I spent some time in prison of recent times doing a podcast series, and I was fascinated by the technology that's available now. That it might be the offence or an assault happened now, but they can look back at all the movements a week prior to that, and from all different angles, and it has to make it more difficult. But I've seen, not so much when I was in the police, because it wasn't the type of conversations that I would be having, but since I've been out of the police and people I've met doing this podcast, the effect that has on people. And there was a person sitting here in the studio, Russell Manser, who's sadly passed away, but talked about being sent to a prison as a 17-year-old and put in a cell with two sex offenders and just brutalised for days on end. And he came out angry and subsequently, spent the next 20 years in and out of jail. And his whole life was dictated by, this is never going to happen to me again.
Yeah. And I think that, undertaking research like that was important, but also showed me that there's more ways to change things than protest, and that the role of academia in society is actually really important when it picks up on and is able to highlight, not things that are obscure, but things that are fundamental. I mean, any of us could go to jail. Yeah. That's the reality. Yep. Me for my prior sins, you for your prior sins, we could all end up
Yeah.
in jail. And if we do, we should be safe.
Yeah, that's not part of the punishment. And you're quite right with the academic study, the research, and all the information that can back it up. That when this next young lawyer, like you were at the time, saying, "Well, I'm concerned about what will happen to my client," and here, in fact, is a study that shows, it does carry weight. I think I'd like to think, and a shout out to corrective services, and just a bit of a segue, but. I went to, and you practiced in Wellington, or you presided in Wellington, the Macquarie Correctional Centre, where they're approaching prisons a completely different way, and a lot of that is that the prisoners feel safe. And I'm not just talking about sexual assaults, but in that environment, prisoners are treated with respect. I hadn't seen a jail like it where they're calling the corrective services officers by names, and there's mutual respect both sides. Like, shout out not only to the prisoners but corrective services officers. They work for 6 hours in whatever industry they could find within the prison, and they study for 6 hours, and then they all stay in a dorm. The interesting part of all the prisoners residing in the dorm, I thought it'd be a bloodbath. I thought, maximum security prisoners, 25 in one dorm, where they're pretty well free to roam and do what they want. It actually taught them social skills, and I joked with them in there, and subsequently, that if there was someone within that pod, the 25 that they didn't get on, they'd almost, like one of those reality TV shows, vote them off the island. No, we don't like this person. Could we move out? And I've got to say, I was so impressed, and it hasn't been running long enough to see the after effect, the studies that once they've been released from prison. But the majority of prisoners I spoke to in there said what it sets us up for is that it teaches us how to integrate back into society. And, these weren't all the do-gooder prisoners. These were some hard cases, the people that we all would have heard their names in the media for the crimes that they've committed. And some of the younger blokes, and there was a lot of people in there for lengthy... the food there was very good because there's a lot of chefs, because chefs got involved in drug dealing, or who would have guessed. But there were people serving lengthy custodial sentences, and they said when we're in other prisons, the more traditional prisons, every time we walked out of our cell, we had to bridge up and get ready to take on whoever was going to come at us, and there'd always be someone. Here they felt safe, they could relax, they could let their guard down. And I got to say, I was so impressed, and I honestly hope that type of prison gets integrated across the board.
Look, there's some great things happening in that area, and also some of the specialist Aboriginal units are really doing some great work with Aboriginal young people and Aboriginal adults in terms of connection to culture, and the studies show that will lead to less likely to reoffend. The enemy of a good prison system is the tabloid media often having a go at it being too soft.
Yes.
What the real outcome that you want from a prison is people not to return, and we've been failing at that. About 70% of prisoners will go back within 5 years.
Yeah.
Now, prisons like you've described, maybe you're not going to get to 80% not returning, but you might well get to 50 or 60 or 70% not returning. And it looks, Henry Lawson wrote in, I think, 1917, when he was in prison, he said the press are printing their smug lies and paying their shameful debt. They talk of the benefits prisoners have and the things that prisoners get. And, we need to look at prisons and go, I don't actually care if there's great education or great physical surroundings or good food or whatever, as long as people are less likely to reoffend, because particularly violent offenders, that has such a long-lasting impact. And we know that most violent offenders are domestic violence offenders, and we know the impact that has on their children and their children's children and their families and their partners. And we just, anything to put a stop to that. I don't care what it costs or how soft it looks.
Yeah. Well, David, I spent time in there, and there was a couple of weeks, and I thought, am I going soft here? Am I taking that prisoner's side? Because, you have that go soft on crime. What am I talking about? I'm an ex-cop, go soft on crime. I spoke to Ken Marslew. His son was murdered in an armed robbery. Just a young fella working at the Pizza Hut, paying his way through university, and an armed robbery, and he was shot and killed. It was a horrendous crime, and Ken was very angry and campaigned and led Enough is Enough and different campaigns, mandatory sentencing, getting tough on crime. And I've become quite close with Ken since I've left the cops. We knew each other before. And I rang him on, okay, this is what I'm seeing in prison. What's your take on this, Ken? And he said, that's about getting smart on crime, not getting tough on crime. If we can reduce crime, there's less victims. Everyone wins. And I that strengthened my resolve that, okay, that's, if anyone's got a right to really question what goes on in prisons, it's someone that's lost their child in circumstances like Ken did. And I think everyone's a winner. And as we were talking the other day, the cost of keeping prisoners in custody. That what if we channeled that money somewhere else to rehabilitate diversionary programs that keep people out of prison? Has to be a benefit to it.
Absolutely. And I think, and the other whole aspect to that is, well, who's in prison and who needs to be in prison? If we make sure that you got the right people, the people who really need to be detained, and you and I both started in an era where fine defaulters were thrown into prison, where possession of a small amount of drug led to a prison term, whereas we've rationalised that to an extent, and we need to always be focused on that. If the right people are in prison, the community is protected, and not just immediately, but in the medium to long term, if they're treated like humans and given responsibility and learn decision-making processes.
Well, if they're treated like animals, they come out like animals, and that's, I've heard prisoners say that. But even the prisoners in these maximum security prisons acknowledge that society's not for everyone. Like, there's people in here, and they'll point to them and go, that person should never be released, and it's one of the people that society need to be protected by. Okay, magistrate. When describe the role of a magistrate, because people look at magistrates, and I'm surprised. I'm constantly surprised how many people never actually experience court. And there's only a small percentage, either the ones that commit offences or the ones that have been caught up in witnessing a crime. There's a lot of people that never see an inside of the court. So what is the role of a magistrate? How would you describe it?
The magistrate is the coalface of the criminal justice system. Every single criminal case starts in the magistrate's court. But it's such a varied job. Magistrates are also coroners. So we also deal with coronial matters. Magistrates also have a civil jurisdiction, so disputes between people up to $100,000 are dealt with in the local court. But all crimes start in the magistrate's court. And what that means is even a murderer will start in the magistrate's court and then go up to higher courts. But about 93% of all cases start and finish in the magistrate's court. And they used to just deal with summary offences, traffic matters, very minor offences. But over the years, the efficiency dividend of having just a magistrate, not a judge and jury, determining matters means that the jurisdiction has expanded. So magistrates deal basically with people who've been charged with the vast majority of offences and determine their guilt, and if they're guilty, determine their sentence. So the average day of a magistrate would be dealing with a defended hearing, for example, where someone's pleading not guilty to a domestic violence offence, or a cultivation of prohibited plant offence, or a white-collar crime, or, more likely than not, a traffic offence, and determining if they're guilty. The maximum penalty magistrates can impose is 5 years imprisonment. So nothing like the district court, which has unlimited, and Supreme Court. But still, the nuts and bolts of the criminal justice system revolve around the local court, and the magistrate sits like a judge, but without the superannuation and without the wig. And
come on, David, let that go. Let that go.
I've let it go, or associates for that matter. But and there's magistrates in every country town, either ones that come in each, up to a certain size. So even small towns in this area, places like Kyogle and Mullumbimby, and Maclean will each have a magistrate visiting them, once a week or once a month, or a few days a week, or in Lismore and the bigger places every day. So magistrates are at the coalface of the criminal justice system, and they are the judicial officer that most people will come in contact with. Just in New South Wales now, they're called judges of the local court, starting next year.
Yeah, I heard that.
And it's been the case in the ACT and the Northern Territory for a while. And I think it reflects better the role. I mean, who knows? You're right. People don't know what a magistrate does, but they'd be more likely to know what a judge does. And really, they're just judges of the local court.
Yeah. I would imagine it's a lonely job, sitting there. And I say that from my observations. Like, the prosecution have got their team, the defence have got their team, the people in the gallery, the media are hanging out doing what the media do, and there's the magistrate all on their own and making some very big decisions, knowing that they're potentially going to be scrutinised by some very informed legal people sitting above them and on for different matters.
Well, and not just scrutinised by them. When I was first appointed, my first appointment was Dubbo. And the local member was Jerry Peacock, and never had you met a more law and order person than Jerry Peacock, who also owned the local newspaper. So you can imagine, what that was like. I was on there. It was a real trifecta. So, yeah. But yes, it is lonely because lawyers tend to mix with lawyers in a country town. And I was a country practitioner. A lot of my friends were lawyers. And then you go to the bench, and of course you can't mix with the lawyers because they're before you. So it is lonely. And country magistrates, by their very nature, sit on their own. It's not like the Downing Centre or one of the big city courts where you might have 20 magistrates and you can all get together at morning tea and have a chat. And shortly after believe it or not, when I started, we used to have morning teas with all the lawyers and all the prosecutors. The police sergeant's wife would traditionally put it on, and we would all gaggle and sort out the cases. Well, that was soon thrown out, quite rightly. It did mean that it was a pretty lonely existence. And I was living in Dubbo, and you buy your newspaper, and the newsagents say, "Why aren't you locking people up more?" And you go to the checkout, and the young woman working there would say, "You're not going to lock my boyfriend up, are you?" And so you couldn't avoid the area.
That's like I hear the dramas of being the local cop that you're never really off duty, but it's pressure times 10 when you're the magistrate of young Susie's coming before you next week. She's a good girl, as you're buying your cup of coffee or
that's right,
something like that. So.
I think it is really true of local sergeants too, and I think policemen's kids, like magistrates' kids, they get a hard time at times.
Yes. Well, when did you make the decision? So you practiced law for a period of time, and then you set up the university, the law faculty there. When did you decide that I want to be a magistrate?
Jeff Shaw was the Attorney General, and he and I had some arguments about a whole set of things. We got on very well, but he was sick of me pestering him about law changes I wanted to see, and he said, "I'm going to stop having to deal with you soon." And I said, "Well, good luck with that." And then I got the phone call that you least expect, which was from the Governor's private secretary, which was to offer me a job as a magistrate. And I thought, well, I'd come across some really good magistrates in my time. There was one, Phil Molan, who's since passed away. But I'd also come across some terrible magistrates who I had very little respect for. And I thought, well, I can do this job well. I can change the world. There's things that I really want to make a difference on: Aboriginal overrepresentation, drug laws, things like that. And so I went into it with the usual gusto of a good lefty protester, and thought I could really change things from the inside. And that's why I did it. Also, to be mercenary about it, it meant it was more than a doubling of my salary. It looked like a terrific, secure job until you, at that time, till you're 70 years of old. And I thought, well, this is pretty good.
In here. Now, Dubbo is your first, where you first posted. That's a tough area to be the local court magistrate. I've spent a lot of time in Dubbo, not work there, attached there, but through murder investigations and the reputation of the town. You would have a lot of people coming through the courts there.
Absolutely, and you know the magistrates out there shared the circuit work as well, which was really hard towns, towns that were racked with really deep social problems, and the criminal justice system, the police and the magistrate and the defence and the prosecutors were meant to solve these problems, and of course we couldn't. We were dealing with we were putting a band-aid over a gaping wound of a whole range of different things. And I would sit in many towns where the only people I would ever lock up were Aboriginal people. And that's depressing.
And look, I'm very much aware of the problems and the high representation of the Indigenous population in our prisons and in our court system, and it's quite alarming. I have an association with a lot of Indigenous people, and through my work, mainly through my work as a police officer, and I know that I always felt they were disadvantaged in the justice system. They weren't comfortable in a court situation. There was a whole range of things that made me feel that, there's a reason there's a high representation there, and the problem's not going to be fixed the way that we approached it. What's your take on it? Because you would have seen a lot of that, I would imagine, in areas like Dubbo and out from there.
Yeah, it's a disheartening. It's one of those wicked problems that, and I think the first thing to recognise is the criminal justice system can do very little.
Yeah.
By the time people get to court, by the time they're committing offences, by the time their families are dissolving, it's too late to do that much, and certainly, imprisoning and the like. And the extent of the problem was and is overwhelming. I was really blessed by having great prosecutors who saw the problem and bent over backwards to do what we could within the limitations of the system to deal with people appropriately. And of course, talented, young, idealistic Aboriginal legal service lawyers, who many of whom are now the judges and politicians that we from all sides of politics that speak sense to this issue. So we muddled through, but it was overwhelmingly depressing. I remember a young man who in Wellington local court who said to me, sacked his lawyer and said, "I'm guilty." He'd robbed a bank with a syringe. Yeah. He said, "I'm guilty. I just want you to lock me up, but I want to go to the big house," meaning Bathurst Jail. Yeah. And I said, "Well, why do you want to go there?" And he said, "Well, my dad there and my grandfather's there, and I'd really like to spend some time with them." And I just, that sinking feeling in the pit of your stomach saying that that's what you aspire to. So it was really quite overwhelming, and we could tinker at the edges. But the problems of Aboriginal overrepresentation in the criminal justice system are largely not about the criminal justice system. They're about the education system, and they're about health. They're about lack of welfare and support. And we know that programs since then, like justice reinvestment, like circle sentencing, none of that existed then. Many of the sentencing options that are available, community service work, didn't exist then. So we were very limited. It was very difficult. We all had the goal, and I mean the police as well, had the goal of keeping people out of jail as much as we could and keeping the community safe. But it was an uphill battle and inherently depressing. I don't mean that from a clinical point of view, but it's just like the drudgery of it, really. Yeah,
I'm hearing what you're saying, and I pick up on the fact that we can't fix it at the justice system, and prevention is better than cure. And if we can prevent them going down that path, like the Indigenous communities, and when you talk about a grandfather in prison and the father in prison, and a young fellow wants to go in there to see his relatives, that sort of breaks your heart, doesn't it? That's what hope has that young fella got. I've heard people talk about when kids are going off track and like restorative justice and diversionary programs. But one person, it might have been Jaron Badgent, an Aboriginal lady that grew up in the block and joined the police. Very, very impressive person. She's out of the police now. But she talked about a person that was a young fellow that was sentenced for minor crimes. It might have been, a bike or stealing a bike or something. And instead of a sentence, he was told to hang out with one of the elders and go fishing with the elder for a couple of weeks. And I think what a great idea something like that is. That could potentially make a difference. Break that cycle.
I saw that a lot with circle sentencing when I was in Lismore. For 10 years we ran a circle sentencing, and so that meant that offenders who pleaded guilty, instead of being sentenced by me, went before a circle, and the circle included the victim of the crime, the police officer involved, and a circle of elders, as well as the defence team and all the rest of it. So it was a big circle. Yeah. But there was, more often than not, there was no dry eye in the place. Yeah. It was emotional and it was genuine, and it was doing that. It was seeking to utilise the wisdom and respect for elders to effect a proper sentence that would be less likely for people to reoffend. And of course it's proven to be so, which is why circle sentencing is universally seen as not the solution, but as part of a solution.
And if we put our efforts in and our money in at that point in time, maybe we don't have to spend the money we do down the track with people when they're incarcerated and all the impact that has. There was
Absolutely. I just wanted to, I finished up 10 years on the circuit at Lismore, and I said to one of the elders, the very last circle that I did, I'll really miss you guys. I've learnt so much. I'm so glad for your involvement in it. I just wondered how much you paid for this. And they said, we're not paid. And I said, this is every week. 10 years we've been meeting as a circle. And they go, yep, that's my own time. Not paid a cent, and I thought there's the defence lawyer and the magistrate and the police officer were all being paid, and the elders themselves. This is their input into the next generation that they care so much about, and it really showed the commitment of those people.
David, you touched on something that I learnt very much after I left the police. I thought I was a big tough crime fighter and making a difference on crime, and when I've stepped away from policing, I've looked at some people that are doing stuff exactly as you've just described, and not getting paid or doing it just because it's the right thing to do, and they're making more difference on reducing crime than I ever could with a pair of handcuffs and a gun.
Or sitting on the bench with a gavel, that's for sure.
Yeah, and I would imagine that would be part of it as a magistrate, feeling that frustration, like, I can see it, I can feel it, but there's nothing I can do about it. It's a system, and the system's set up, and I can tell that you care about the job that you do, but I don't see you as someone that's just naive to the fact, kumbaya, let everyone walk free and there'll be no problems. Society do need to be protected, but I heard an interview that you did where you were talking about a young fella that he couldn't be given bail, or he couldn't be released because of the nature of the offence, and you ended up catching a plane with him. Do you want to just tell that story? Because when you talk about dry eyes, I was walking along listening to you on that, talking about it. I thought that's really, really sad, and you could just picture it.
So we used to fly into circuit courts, and Brewarrina was one of those courts. And when I got there one day, the registrar, who's the clerk of the court, the administrative person there, said, look, we've got no police transport. You can't refuse anyone bail, any young people bail, because there's no police officers to take them. Yeah. And I said, well, I'll do my best. Anyway, in the middle of the day, lo and behold, a young person was arrested, and there was no way he was getting bail. That's for sure, and nobody wanted him to get bail. And anyway, so I refused him bail, and then I got on the plane to fly back, and it was like an 7-seater. And I was on one side, and sitting right next to me was him, handcuffed to the handhold there, and looking pretty terrified. Anyway, we acknowledged each other. I should say, as a prelude, Brewarrina has the oldest man-made structure in the world, which is the fish traps, 30,000 years old. And you can really only fathom them from the air, this intricate pattern of stonework that traps the river when it floods. And then people would have fish for years, sometimes decades between floods, by trapping the fish in these dams. Yeah. So that's about 10 times older than the pyramids. In any event, the plane goes to take off, and I could see he was shaking. And I said to him, "Have you ever been on a plane before?" He said, "I've never been out of Brewarrina before." And anyway, so we then taxied around and started to take off. And as we started to take off, he started gagging. The police officer sitting behind him couldn't do much. So I grabbed my sick bag, and I was holding the sick bag and not really liking bodily fluids too much. I just looked out the window. And he's vomiting in the bag, and I'm looking out at the fish traps as we're taking off. And I just think that freeze frame of me, it just sums up everything that's wrong with the criminal justice system and the culture that we're ignoring of these ancient people with ancient wisdom and connection to land. And there we are, taking him away from his community, and there he is vomiting and scared, and the police and me. I mean, just the whole picture is just one of sadness, really.
Yeah. I think when I heard that, I could just imagine it, and really in a world that he could not understand too, in a plane, first time in the plane, and it was just terrified. And
I mean, now we have language for this.
Yeah.
This was almost 30 years ago. Now we have language for this, which is things like FASD.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a young man who did not understand the consequences of his actions.
Yeah.
I mean, I think all of us with children know that many children still don't know the consequences of their actions, but this is a really fundamental problem. And, now one would hope we would be treating this young person rather than just locking him up.
Yeah, I think those type of improvements, and it's not easy, like we're seeing here going, it's not waving a wand and the world will be fixed. We might take a break at this point. When we come back, I'll talk more about your role as a magistrate, because 21 years, I'm sure you've seen a lot. Talk about the impact of drugs, and in particular ice, when you've seen ice come in. I saw that in the latter part of my police career, the type of impact, but that sort of changed the dynamics for what you were dealing with in the courts. I think you've had dealings with sovereign citizens. That's always an interesting chat. We on I Catch Killers have upset a couple of sovereign citizens on things that we've said from people that were impacted by sovereign citizens. I'd also like to take a dive into your thoughts on artificial intelligence, AI, and how that's going to impact on law down the track, because I think that's an interesting area to go to. And I do want to speak to you about the reason, as a magistrate, and we talk about a lonely job and a risky job. There was a period in time for one particular person where you had to move out of your home and put in a secure location because of threats made against you. So, whole range of things to talk about.
Have we only got another hour? How are we going to possibly do that?
We could extend it. I'm sure we can do. We'll manage our best.
Let's see how we go.
Okay. Cheers.